Welcome back to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 30. Steve is with me, and we're going to spend most of this podcast, I should say, breaking down an article that is highly questionable, is probably the best way of putting it. Terrible in some ways, you would have to say. So if you want some ranting about how bad this article is, some discussion about some other things that have been happening lately, this is the podcast episode for you. So let's get straight into it. Long time no see, Steve. It's not like I was just at your place a couple of days ago and I'm back recording a podcast now. It's been good.
Apologies you've had to spend so much time talking to me. That can't be easy.
But it is difficult at times. It is difficult, especially the cursing out that I usually get when we, before the show. You're just dropping F-bombs all over the place.
Yeah, I'm the one with the potty mouth out of the two of us. It's me.
It's
me.
Yeah, 100%.
The Hardware Unboxed Patreon members would know that to be true.
Yeah, how many times in the live stream? I think I dropped one. Well, I can't even say it. I probably shouldn't even say it. Does YouTube demonetize you for using swear words in the first minute of a podcast? Probably.
Your potty mouth was popping off. Let's just say that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I was using all the bad ones.
Yeah, you're naughty.
All right, we've got some interesting articles and stuff to talk about today, including one article that is just going to bring up quite a bit of fun because it's that bad. But I figured I would just start talking about, just briefly, the EK water block situation, just because I imagine there's a lot of people that think that we're going to be touching on that situation in this podcast because it happened since the last podcast. But we have given our extensive thoughts on it in an upcoming Q&A video that we filmed earlier this week, which hasn't gone live yet. So we're not going to give our in-depth thoughts again in this podcast. We may as well just wait for that video to go live on the Hardware Unboxed main channel. I'm not sure exactly when that will go live, but yeah, our full thoughts on that are really in there. However, since we recorded that segment, which will be going out after this, but bit of a mess with the scheduling anyway, EK has actually responded to a lot of the criticism, which is probably worth just touching on briefly, just in case people see that video and are like, okay, well, in that Q&A, why didn't you touch on their response or whatever? It's because it was filmed before now. But anyway, they have basically said in their statement that they've heard the criticism, they've apologized, they're working to resolve the issues. That's really the summary of it. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can go read it on other publications if you're really interested, but they haven't sat on their hands and tried to ignore the situation. Their CEO has come out, they've made a video, they've talked about it, which I think is probably a step in the right direction. Not sure whether that will change the fate of the company or not, but it is worth, being fair to them, saying that they've made this statement in our podcast. So not sure if you had any additional thoughts on that, Steve, but that's currently where the situation's at.
No real additional thoughts for me on that one. We'll see how that one turns out.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, there's still a lot of things up in the air with making sure they follow through with the things that they've said in their statement. But yeah, if you want to hear our thoughts on why EK might be in this position and all those sorts of things, then yeah, our upcoming Q&A series will probably shed some light on that. Also this week, and I think this is probably starting to get a little exciting with these sorts of things coming up, is we're getting into leak and rumor season in terms of legitimate, what I would class as more legitimate leaks and rumors. So a couple of days ago, Gigabyte accidentally revealed that the next generation of Ryzen processors will be the AMD Ryzen 9000 series. So a lot of motherboard manufacturers have been talking about their BIOS updates for next-gen AM5 CPUs. Most companies, when they mention these things, just talk about future CPUs. They're like, okay, we're supporting the future generation. Not Gigabyte, though. Their statement, they've basically said the latest AGESA 1.1.7.0 beta BIOSes support the coming AMD Ryzen 9000 series. So they've basically just revealed that. And yeah, not that there's too much news relating to this specific thing, but I think we both had expected at this point that they would be Ryzen 9000 parts. So
I guess that's exciting news, probably for Computex, which isn't that far away. Well, it's exciting for us. And it's exciting in general, I suppose, if you're into the tech scene, and especially for those who have invested in AM5. But with Computex being a bit of a non-show last year, we didn't have too much to cover, too much to talk about. I don't want to get my hopes up, but it seems like there'll be some stuff to talk about and see at the show this year, which will be obviously good for our viewers as well, because we're not just flying 10 hours to talk about, oh, look, there's a new way of connecting fans. So.
Yeah, that is kind of what it was like last year. But I think when we start to see these sorts of news items where companies are sort of slipping up a little bit, maybe accidentally revealing a few things. This is when you can start. This is when I feel that you can start to get excited about upcoming products. Because if we're talking at the start of the year or late last year and you're hearing AM5 rumors, it's very hard to know which of those things are factually accurate or not. A lot of the time it's too far in the future to have any sort of accurate information about. But once you start having partners that clearly have these CPUs on hand for testing and making sure that their motherboards work with the processors, and they're starting to talk about these things in this way, then that's when more and more things start coming out about products. So yeah, from now on, we'll see what happens with these products, but I imagine it's not too far away. And relating to this, there's been a few other rumors that have sort of been coming up lately. Not that I want to really get into these specifically, but it's just interesting that we're hearing more about, like, potentially there's going to be an EPIC series for the AM5 socket. There's been some discussion about what's coming up with RDNA 4 and VRAM configurations. Are they using G6 memory or G7 memory? In, I believe, some driver patches and stuff, there's been discussion of new BattleMage GPU capabilities. So talking about UHBR standards with DisplayPort 2.1. So once you start seeing these sort of things, these products aren't probably that far away. And that means that, yeah, it's potentially going to be more exciting the second half of this year. Because I think, just judging by how we're both feeling, we were talking about this when I was at your place the other day, like it's kind of a bit of a struggle at the moment to find interesting video ideas and video topics to make. I feel like this slump that we're in at the moment in terms of exciting stuff is, I don't know, has it felt like it's lasted a lot longer than we'd usually see? At least that's my impression.
Yeah, it has. And I'm not sure if that's because the rate at which we're advancing now has slowed down, or if it's because we've just had this extended period where there's been some other driving force that's taken away the focus on gaming for these companies. Like, we had the cryptocurrency mining thing, which took place since, well, that was the launch of the RDNA 2 and GeForce 30 series.
Yeah.
And that went for 2 years, which was essentially the lifespan of those products. And then as that sort of went away, then we got the next generation products, which is the current generation products. And shortly after they were launched, it all sort of went into a similar but not as drastic situation with, AI and the demand there. So certainly not as bad as the 2 years we saw from cryptocurrency mining, but it didn't recover in the way I suppose that everyone was hoping it would. So, and it's probably not as bad as what a lot of people think, because, there are things such as like real world forces, such as inflation. So when people keep saying, when are we going back to the way GPU prices were? Well, that's never going to happen because inflation. So what was $700 is now just over $800. So that is a factor. You're not going to see those $200 GPUs that were quite good. They're now more like $300 to $400, and that'll be a thing that continues to happen. But it does feel like the drought has been ongoing.
I'd like to see more segregation between the various different product releases. Like, it feels like all of the products happen to be released all around the same time. I know some of that is due to, manufacturing process development and those sorts of things. A lot of companies are wanting to get on the train of the latest and greatest node. So if they're all utilizing a new node, then they're probably all going to produce products roughly around the same time. However, at the same time, it really does clump everything together into the one thing. So you have these periods where it's super busy, where we're covering like all these different product launches, and then just long periods of really nothing. I feel like, companies like AMD and Intel with new GPU stuff would probably benefit from trying to get those release windows away from when a next-gen GeForce product is coming out, especially AMD. Like, if they've got products ready and are potentially a bit more ready to release products, they should be doing everything possible to get RDNA 4 out before the next GeForce series. For Intel to get BattleMage out before they're competing with GeForce products. And that'll just split things up a bit, make a bit more interest in the GPU market and things, spread things out a bit more. People have an extended lifespan talking about these products. But what typically tends to happen is we hear a lot about, next-gen RDNA, and then AMD still manages to launch after GeForce products, but then it's like a month later. So I don't know. I'd like to see a bit more split. But again, like, they're constrained by various different things there. It's not like they can just make the node come out slightly earlier for them. They're kind of stuck with that, really.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Do you want to talk about this very silly article? 'Cause
Well,
I want to talk about the silly article.
that didn't take long, Tim. But yeah, silly articles are always fun. And we'll just sit and chat. I mean, that's kind of the point of the podcast. I did open up the silly article just then, which is very silly, it appears to be. And I don't know if you've clicked on comments yet.
I did click on comments earlier, which they don't appear by default. You do have to click comments.
Yeah, I went and looked for them. Yeah,
this guy's getting torn to shreds.
I'm not. There's a lot of comments. There's an impressive amount of comments, and there's
some comments include positive. Worst attempt at shilling I've ever seen. Didn't know user benchmark write articles now. Is this an old April 1st article? So this is just setting the tone for what we're about to talk about. All right, should we go?
I've scanned through probably 30 comments quickly, and I'm looking for a positive comment. Because obviously whenever you produce any kind of content, and we don't like to just bash on content because we know how much time and effort goes into it. Admittedly, this is a low effort content piece, so I feel a bit more comfortable having fun with it. It's very, very low effort. This is like less than an hour's work. Usually, you get a couple of fans from either side that are unhappy with something or whatever, but you hope that what I like to call the normies, the normal people, which is not a term that I'm using in a negative light. It's people who are sort of cool, calm, collected, level-headed. Usually those people you want to have a positive outlook on whatever it is you're putting it out there. You're not too concerned about the opinions of the fanboys, but it looks like everyone's on the same page by not enjoying this article. So anyway, I'll stop rambling.
Let's get into it. So this is an article on the website XDA Developers. So we're not talking about a small publication. XDA is quite well known. They have quite an extensive forum. I remember looking at them way back in the day, especially around phone stuff. But anyway, they've produced this article that is titled 4 Reasons Intel is Better than AMD for the Average Gamer. And the subtitle says, for most gamers out there, Intel is clearly the better choice when building a gaming PC. Here are the simple reasons why. And the key takeaways, which this article has 4 points that we'll probably get to throughout it, but just the key takeaways got me triggered real bad when you sent me the article to begin with. So the key takeaways are things like the AM5 platform longevity isn't something the average gamer cares about. Intel offers better value in both the budget and mid-range segments, and AMD's greater power efficiency isn't a huge deal when choosing a gaming CPU. This is all according to this article. So, not sure what to make of that. But let's get into the reasons, and we'll talk about each of these things and see how reasonable it is. So, reason number 4 that they've presented, so they've gone from 4 through to 1. Is AMD's stability issues are still worse than Intel's. AM5 still hasn't gotten used to faster RAM, they say. So that's interesting. They say that when AM5 first launched, a string of stability issues put a damper on the excitement around the platform. In contrast, Intel's Raptor Lake CPUs have always supported generally faster RAM kits. And then it boils down to people not willing to grapple with RAM replacements or tweaking BIOS settings for manual memory overclocking. If you're not willing to do that, you should simply pick Intel. So, what are your thoughts?
There's a shred of truth in that, and it's been stretched so far that it's almost absurd. So, yeah, look, whenever there's a new platform released, and it doesn't really matter if the new platform comes from AMD or Intel, there's always bugs that need to be ironed out. And I've heard people say, this is the fault of AMD or Intel, which I guess is ultimately correct. But at the same time, when you're releasing something that's as diverse as the PC platform, and there's so many different memory kits, motherboards, name it, from USB devices to the amount of flexibility you have is really mind-boggling. It's amazing that it works as well as it does, in my opinion. So when you release this new platform, there's only so much internal testing you can do. There's only so many, different bits of hardware you can test. And then there's only so many ways that you can test that hardware. So the chances are when you throw that out into the wild, people are going to find problems. They're going to report those problems and hopefully they get addressed. And this happens for both AMD and Intel. When Intel released E-cores, for example, there was games that wouldn't even load. So there was a whole heap of issues that took them months to sort out. And, while that was a concern for 12th gen, Intel told us they were actively working on the issue. And so we didn't really use it as a, no, don't buy 12th gen no matter what. It's flawed. It has these problems. It was expected teething issues. Now, when the AM5 platform came along, we didn't have too many problems. Having said that, I did test all of the B650 boards. And, I reported DDR5 6000 being problematic on ASUS boards while it worked fine on pretty much all Gigabyte and MSI boards. So it was quite clear that that was a motherboard issue that was going to get sorted out over time. And again, memory support, USB support, all these sort of things have happened in the past on new Intel platforms. So it's not like this is a unique thing that's inherent to AMD. So it's sort of true. Like there were some boards and some memory kits that had problems. And even today, you can find memory kits and motherboards that aren't compatible with one another. Like that's why they have QVLs, so you can work that out, and hopefully it does work. But yeah, basically, in terms of stability, it's stretching the truth massively. There's no way AMD's AM5 platform is less stable in general than Intel's LJ 1700 platform. And it's kind of a hilarious point to bring up given all the Intel stability issues, which is even made more hilarious by the fact that this article does at one point cite those new recent Intel stability issues that Intel is currently investigating and trying to fix. And frankly, that's probably the biggest issue we've seen AMD or Intel face in recent times. Like it's hard to say if it's a bigger issue than AMD's AM5. What was it? The ASUS boards burning up CPUs in the socket, because that's physical damage. Like that's game over type stuff. Whereas this,
it was quickly identified and resolved as well,
and
which only ended up affecting a couple of CPUs. Not that I want to minimize the issue.
That's right. It
seems like more people have been affected by the Intel issues, at least.
Yeah, it's far more widespread. When I spoke to retailers and distributors, a lot of them hadn't reported any AM5 CPUs coming back with burnt sockets or pins or any. So while it was happening, it was very rare. Certainly not as common, it seems, as these 4090s that are burning up the power connectors, for example. So it was a problem. Again, teething issue, not great, but it was addressed. I don't think there was anyone that was screwed over by that. And, I'm sure all their hardware was replaced. It was a known issue. So I don't know how AMD or one of the motherboard manufacturers could deny a warranty claim with that specific issue, for example. But yeah, look, I guess to summarize, there have been memory-related compatibility problems with AM5, but then the same is also true of LGA 1700. You could argue that AM5 was more problematic because some of the BIOSes on boards weren't great. Updated AGESA code solved that, and further compatibility testing with RAM kits. But they're clutching at straws on that one. That's definitely not a reason why Intel's better or a reason not to buy AM5. And to claim that AM5 still hasn't gotten used to faster RAM, whatever that means, is not true at all. Like AM5 has improved significantly with its RAM compatibility, not necessarily RAM performance. Like DDR5 6000 CL30 is still pretty much the sweet spot in terms of cost and performance. So just get that and you're away. But you can change Infinity Fabric ratios and run with faster memory. It's generally of no benefit to do so. But it has improved. The situation has improved. You couldn't do that previously, whereas now you can. So memory compatibility has significantly improved. I just did a whole round of B650 testing on a heap of absolutely terrible boards that were dirt cheap and not very good. None of them had memory compatibility issues. Like the cheapest of the cheap boards, the crappiest of the crap boards, all of them worked fine. And how many AM5 systems have we built now? We've done quite a few on live streams. I just had them turn on. Then we've loaded Expo and they've just rebooted, done the memory training and worked. And we've never, ever had a single problem with them. So they can't be that bad if we're able. I could pretty much go buy an AM5 motherboard, anyone, pick an AM5 board, an AM5 CPU, and then definitely a DDR5 6000 CL30 kit, but most mainstream well-known memory kits, I can stick that all together, hit the power button, and it will just work. And look, the same is true of LGA 1700. So I would call this a load of crap and a non-issue for both platforms.
Yeah, I think you have to be really careful when you're claiming anything relating to stability issues or bugs and those sorts of things. It's very difficult, even as a tester, to get enough hardware in to claim widespread stability issues, particularly when you're talking about one company versus another company. Like, we could have a bad experience with one board or a couple of boards and say, hey, there's a few issues here. But if we're not testing a significant number of Intel platforms at the same time, it's very difficult to say, well, these issues are, we've had these issues, we haven't had any issues with Intel, therefore AMD has more stability issues. We could have some outliers.
Mhm.
We could have just a configuration that doesn't work, and maybe we didn't find an Intel configuration that didn't work. To really claim this, you have to have a significant number of test configurations to know for sure that there are stability issues. And you can go on Reddit and forums and stuff to gauge people's general opinions on whether they're having issues or not. But even that it's hard to quantify exactly how many issues there are. Because, for example, if people are buying 10 times more AM5 systems than they are Intel LGA 1700 systems, and there are 10 times more complaints about stability issues, that doesn't mean AMD has more stability issues. It just means that they've sold more and the rate of issues is the same, but it's coming out with more issues because there are more users. And certainly when you look at like market share today with AMD and Intel, it's likely that could influence people's general, how often they're posting on forums about stability issues, simply because AM5 is being bought at a higher rate than Intel parts. So with these, it's kind of like the whole, how good is a company's RMA process or their customer support? It's very difficult to definitively make these sorts of claims. And I certainly wouldn't want to be in an article claiming for sure that AMD has more stability issues than Intel, or it has worse stability issues,
or that it's
hasn't
better.
fixed certain problems, or that it's better, right? You can't. The most that we could really say is either based on our experience. So, for example, if we tested a board and had issues, then we could fairly report on that, same as if we hadn't had any issues. But to make general sweeping statements like that, I mean, it's basically impossible.
I want to read a bit because this is quite hilarious, given that we are talking about that the title for this segment of the article is AMD's stability issues are still worse than Intel's. So he says that, then I'm going to read directly from the article. In contrast, Intel's Raptor Lake CPUs have always supported generally faster RAM kits compared to Zen 4 CPUs. So that doesn't matter. The speed at which the memory support, it doesn't matter if Zen 4 is limited to DDR5 5200. That just means that you require cheaper memory to get the resulting performance that is being shown by AMD and reviewers. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Taking advantage or needing faster memory is not a plus. If you can get 7800X 3D performance that is shown everywhere, plastered all over the internet, if you can achieve that with DDR5 5200 CL40 memory, that is 2 big thumbs up. That is a huge win for AMD. So this person, that's just very ignorant of how things work. But then this sentence here I love. Even if you consider the game crashing issues on some Intel chips that recently came to light, they're limited to the high-end 1300K and 1400K SKUs, which are essentially outside the consideration of the average gamer. Like, what is the mental gymnastics even here? We're talking about AMD being less stable, but AMD don't currently have widespread CPU crashing issues for any model, but somehow Intel's better, but just don't worry about the 1300K and the 1400K because, the average gamer's not worrying about them. So why are you not talking about the flagship Intel CPUs, but then you're talking about high-speed memory? Who's pairing DDR5 8000 with a Core i5? Like, what is the mental gymnastics that's going on here? And then this is good as well because the inverse is true of this sentence. What this boils down to is that anyone not willing to grapple with RAM replacements or tweaking BIOS settings for manual memory overclocking should simply pick Intel for their gaming build. Hang on. You would only go with Intel over AMD if you're willing to manually overclock and tune your memory. Not the other way around. Like, there's no... What? That doesn't make any sense. You don't really need to tune the memory on Ryzen. The performance you see is... So that's a weird thing to say. It's been well known that if you really care about getting the most out of your system and you want to spend a ton of time memory tuning, who knows how stable it is, that's a reason at least to go with the 1300K or 1400K, because they are... The memory tuning side of things is much better. There's more depth to it with Intel than there is with AMD.
Yep.
So you could say that.
Yeah. So this point, really doesn't make any sense. But I think, honestly, this is probably the most mild of some of these complaints. Actually, point number 2 isn't the worst, but we'll get to point number 3, which is AMD's power efficiency isn't a huge factor. Every gaming PC has a decent cooler, the article says. So it's a fact that AMD's superior 5nm process node combined with the Zen 4 architecture makes the Ryzen 7000 CPUs way more power efficient than any of the Raptor Lake chips. But what's also a fact is that this doesn't matter much when choosing CPUs, apparently, according to this article. If you're spending around $800 to $1,000 on a gaming PC, you can spare $50 for a budget CPU cooler. There's no dearth of excellent air coolers capable of taming even the Core i9 14900K. You don't even need a fancy AO liquid cooler.
Really? So hang on, we are now talking about the 1400K, because the previous one we weren't. But now
That's right. The previous one was like,
okay,
the 14900K is easily outside the consideration set of the average gamer. But now he's talking about taming the Core i9 14900K with a $50 budget CPU cooler. Yeah,
I'm not sure how accurate that is. You don't even need a fancy AO liquid cooler for a 1400K. I wouldn't be as bold to say that. I'm sure there is a $50 cooler that's quite good. But you'd probably, generally speaking, want to go with a very high-end air cooler if you're sticking it on a 1400K. But, I mean, the 1400K with any cooler is very difficult. It's just the hotspot is so difficult to deal with on that CPU. I mean, they're known to throttle. That's what they do. They thermal throttle like crazy. It's a feature at this point. It's not a design flaw or a bug. It's just what they do.
I think this next part is like...
So higher power bills or temperatures during overclocking. No, it's not during overclocking, buddy. Aren't sensible arguments for the average gamer. No, they're higher power bills and and higher temperatures for the average gamer. That's what you're selling them. There's just no way around it. Like your CPU consumes considerably more... in some instances, it's double the amount of power while gaming to often deliver less performance at a similar price. But I think what we've often said is, look, it doesn't really matter about the price point too much. I think Intel's like Core i3 range is compelling, and I think in my top 5 video more recently, I did still recommend that as the best CPU, because stuff like the Ryzen 5 5500 is not that great. But that stuff's not that fresh in my mind. But generally, if you're comparing, Ryzen 5, Core i5, Ryzen 7, Core i7, and then Ryzen 9, Core i9, in terms of value, performance, they're very competitive. And I think we spoke about this very recently. You were saying how impressive it is, despite Intel's struggles and sort of how far they are behind in an efficiency sense, they've remained competitive in terms of performance.
Yeah.
And so I think
100%.
I think that's true. Well, I believe that to be true. And I think what we would say is with AMD and Intel being very competitive in terms of performance, very competitive in terms of price, you've got to look to other factors such as power efficiency.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the case with GPUs previously. The power consumption, you can sort of forgive and ignore power consumption if you've got a GPU that's significantly cheaper but uses a lot more power for the same sort of price. You're like, okay, well, which sort of thing am I going to preference more? Is it going to be the value of the part, or is it going to be the power consumption? And I feel like it's a reasonable argument to make that a lot of people would prefer the cheaper product that offers better value over the part that has lower power consumption. But when you're talking about parts where that's not really the case in a lot of situations, especially for the higher tier parts that we're talking about now, you can even find situations where for gaming, the AMD part is both better value and has lower power consumption. These become more and more factors. And especially part of this article says high power bills won't influence your buying decision enough. And I feel like that's, again, when you're talking about products that are similar and you're looking for differences and justification to buy one part over another, that higher power bills are certainly something that will influence your buying decision. And this can become very key in places with higher power prices, like Europe in particular, where we've heard a lot of feedback from people across CPU and GPU reviews about the fact that maybe the total ownership cost of these parts long term is going to be significantly higher for them because their power prices are 50 cents a kilowatt hour or something, which can be a lot higher than you would see in the US. So it could be over the course of a couple of years that it is actually costing you, $20, $50, $100 more just in additional power costs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a non-issue. Like, that is certainly one reason why you would consider buying one part over another part. It's not a non-issue or something that you would just ignore as a no-nonsense gamer, as is talked about in this article. It is definitely a consideration for people and is becoming more of a consideration, if anything, over time.
Well, yes, and there's I don't know if you want to call this person a journalist, but I have a few problems with it. First of all, they're saying AMD's power efficiency isn't a huge factor. That's what they're saying. It's not a huge factor. Okay, elaborate. What do you mean by that? What they really mean by that is AMD's power efficiency isn't a factor. It's not that it's not a huge factor, it's that it's not a factor. It's not a consideration, is what they're saying in this article. They're saying it's not a sensible argument for the average gamer. So they're completely dismissing one of the key advantages of the AMD CPU, which then people accuse us of being shills from time to time. That happens. I get it. But this is actually what you would have to say in order to genuinely look like a shill or a fanboy or being biased, is that you're taking a genuine factor of a product and saying it's not a factor, like, at all, like, completely dismiss it, ignore it. This area where it's much better, we're, for reasons that don't make sense, we're just going to tell you that it's not sensible, ignore it. That's what the article's doing. It hasn't made a coherent argument for why it's not a huge factor. It's just said AMD's power efficiency isn't a huge factor, and then it's talked about overclocking isn't a sensible argument for the average gamer. Like, it's created a straw man, essentially, right?
Again, like, in some situations, you can make arguments as to why power efficiency is a less important factor as opposed to the key areas, really.
It doesn't have to be a deal breaker.
Pricing. Yeah, that's right. And I feel like, especially for some of the mid-range processors and things like that, you get into more sensible ranges for power consumption. You don't have to buy AIO liquid coolers, even though this article claims that apparently they aren't necessary even for Core i9 parts. But you can make that argument in some cases, and we certainly do make that in some cases. But again, if you're looking at the products overall and factoring in performance, pricing, and those sorts of things, if it's already generally a better processor for performance or similar in performance, if it's already better or similar in terms of value, then it also being better in power efficiency, it isn't like you're just like, okay, well, we're just going to ignore that, or there's some other consideration why you'd buy Intel instead. It already is hitting several marks, and it has this additional benefit. So I feel like this argument really would only make sense in the reverse. Like, if Intel had the more power efficient parts and were potentially offering similar value, or the 14900K is more expensive than a 7800X3D. So if they were offering better power efficiency, similar performance, productivity advantages, but it was more expensive, then you would start thinking about, well, maybe by AMD, but it's less efficient. So therefore, you'd kind of discount that for value reasons. But that's not the case. We're talking about a part which is also more, it makes no sense to me at all. Makes no sense.
No, it's just more clutching at straws and going out of your way to try and, downplay AM5 and the supporting processors. So a weird one. I guess we'll move on, though.
Yeah, so the next argument, this is probably the most reasonable one apart in this article, which is Intel provides more bang for buck. Budget and mid-range have Intel written all over them. And it goes on to say things like price to performance is probably higher in the minds of most PC gamers looking to maximize value for money, while AMD might have excellent processors in the form of the Ryzen 5 7600X and so on. Intel has AMD beat if we strictly focus on the budget and mid-range segments. Then goes on to point out parts like the Core i5 13600KF at $250, 13600K, Core i3 13100, and so on. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the 13600KF is necessarily an argument I'd be using in terms of value, considering that there are parts in that price range on AM5 that are reasonable. But I think maybe when you get down to the Core i3s in that sort of very cheap segment, that there is some merit to this argument. I don't know what you'd think though. You do our CPU reviewing.
I've just pulled up my top 5 best CPUs, which was updated last December. And yeah, for the entry level options where every last dollar matters, I picked the Core i3 12100F as the best gaming CPU, I believe. Yeah, I believe that's right. I'm just skimming through it. I said a lot of things, but I believe the Core i3 12100F was picked as the best value CPU because it was much cheaper than everything else, and basically the Ryzen 5 5500. So look, that's historically been true anyway. So you can absolutely make the argument that for the most entry-level, cheapest computer you can possibly make with the intention of playing some games, that Intel offers the best solution, which makes sense, right? Whichever company is in the position of disadvantage, let's say, they generally offer the best value products. And once you filter down to the bottom, that's where they win. And then it became competitive from that point forward, basically. I don't have, I'd have to bring up the video because it actually shows in the video, like the script doesn't necessarily say, but once you get up to so what did they say? The 13600K often beating the Ryzen counterpart in many titles, but then they acknowledge that the Ryzen counterpart is cheaper. The 13600K is an interesting one to pick because if I go over to Newegg, for example, the 13600K costs $272. Comparing that to the Ryzen 5 7600 is a bit weird because I think that's like a $200 processor, the Ryzen 5, or just let's go the 7600 because really that's the part you would buy, right?
Well, in the article, they talk about the 7600X specifically, which they've listed at $225 compared to the $250 13600KF.
So,
but I think if you're picking the KF model from Intel, which is obviously cheaper than just the K model, then you would also pick the non-X Ryzen model because it's effectively the same part or very, very similar and is slightly cheaper.
So the KF is, they've got that, it's about $250, whereas the Ryzen 7 7700 is $290. So it is more expensive, but it's definitely, well, I'm pretty confident it's the better gaming CPU of the two. I could probably pull up some data, but it doesn't really matter. It's in terms of price and performance, those two factors and those two factors alone, it's like they're both good options.
It's a toss-up.
Yeah, it's like it's like Ryzen 5 7600, 7600X, Ryzen 7 7700, 7700X, and then chuck in the Core i5s. They all, in terms of gaming performance, overall, not a significant difference. In terms of price, not a significant difference. Much of a muchness. To say that AMD has, what did they say? Intel's comfortably beaten AMD or something in terms of value.
They say budget and mid-range have Intel written all over them.
Yeah, I mean, absolute entry level, sure. Anything beyond the dirt cheap of cheap, it's like, no, not a thing. And the further up you go, certainly the less true that statement becomes. The 7800X 3D for gaming just slaughters. So in terms of value.
It's an interesting one. I feel like with these sort of value arguments and stuff, it can come down to things like, other factors, especially when you're talking about two parts that are similar. And we've just been talking about, previously things like power consumption come into the the discussion point, platform longevity, is a point brought up in this article, which we'll talk about in a moment, which also factors into things. But yeah, I mean, you could make the claim that if you're talking about CPUs specifically, you're not factoring in other aspects to platform and whatnot, then yeah, there is some reason to go with Intel. But I think it's a stretch to say that they definitively provide more bang for buck and that they have, especially in the mid-range parts, and that you would clearly choose them. And there's some interesting things that I generally try to avoid when I'm talking about parts. So for example, they say here, this is because these two chips, this is comparing the 13600KF and the 7600. They say this is because these two chips deliver similar gaming performance with the 13600K often beating the Ryzen counterpart in many titles. Now, of course, if they offer similar gaming performance and the 13600K often beats the Ryzen part in some titles, then that means that the reverse also has to be true, that the Ryzen part must beat the 13600K in some other games, because otherwise they wouldn't have overall similar gaming performance. So, yeah, those sorts of statements, I just generally try and not really say, because
they're trying their best to push. It's
you're
very
contradicting
clear.
yourself in the one statement by bringing up the one part's faster when they actually have similar performance. Like, that's not really how it works.
They're mincing their words, and that's what happens when you're trying to paint a false narrative, but while still remaining somewhat like you try not to be too absurd and get caught out, because people can quickly research this and see that you're wrong. So you sort of mince your words a bit there. So anyway, I mean, that's probably the closest argument they've made to having some merit, but also, and then what's the worst one?
So the final one, arguably the worst one, point number one, AMD's platform longevity isn't a must-have. The average gamer isn't chasing easy CPU upgrades. And then in big quotes in the middle of this paragraph, it says, most users expect to get a decent gaming rig and forget about what's inside till the time the system really becomes obsolete. And I think this has been clearly and obviously disproven throughout the entirety of the last, from 2017 onwards, this point has been convincingly debunked. Platform longevity is a must-have feature these days. It was the entire reason AM4 was such a success, because you could do drop-in CPU upgrades. And I strongly disagree that a lot of people are building systems and forgetting the components inside and not chasing CPU upgrades. The reason why people did that previously is because they couldn't upgrade their CPU on the same platform. So there was really, like, you build your platform, you put your CPU, and there's really no point considering CPU upgrades because you couldn't do it. But with AM4, that whole mindset has changed. CPU upgrades are now possible. So really it is something that a lot of gamers have been considering. In the similar vein to GPU upgrades, everyone's thinking about a GPU upgrade, but these days CPUs, I think, are in a similar position. Obviously with platform changes, you do have to do a few more complex things relative to a GPU upgrade. But I feel like AM4 has really changed this situation. I just totally disagree that platform longevity isn't a must-have. It's just the total opposite.
The total opposite is true. The total opposite has been proven to be true. And I love the final little sentence here that they sign off this section with. Performance, price, and value for money are far more important factors in the mind of the average gamer compared to how long their motherboard socket will last. So being able to keep your motherboard for multiple CPU upgrades, or at least a significant future CPU upgrade, doesn't factor into value for money, price, performance.
Yeah.
How is that disconnected from those things? So if you bought a B450 motherboard and you stuck a Ryzen 5 2600 on it, or a 3600, but a lot of people did those combos, and then years later, for $300, they could put a 5800X 3D on there, which is roughly equivalent to a Ryzen 7 7700. So you could spend $300 on that CPU or the other CPU and just stick it in your board, carry over, keep using your DDR4 memory, keep using your motherboard. It's an upgrade that takes literal minutes. How is that? That's great, right? I mean, everyone's agreed that's great. That's what's made the platform so wonderful. But how is that not a great value for money option?
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's like 80% more CPU performance for gaming. Like I think I did a Ryzen 5 3600 upgrade to the 5800X 3D. I think on average it was 70 or 80% more performance for CPU limited gaming. That's mind-blowing on the same socket.
Yep.
The value on offer there is unheard of.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's weird that with this point and also the point about power efficiency, that this article is titled 4 Reasons Intel is Better Than AMD for the Average Gamer. Now, if for some reason we say that AMD's platform longevity is a non-factor, right? So we ignore that, we're saying it's not important. Making that point that AM5 and AM4 platform longevity is not important, it doesn't give an advantage to Intel. It's not like by discounting this point that Intel is now more of a purchasing reason because they've got some additional advantage. Intel CPU platforms, they don't have longevity either. So it's not like on one hand you've got one point and then you remove the point, so therefore the competitor is better. At best, it makes this a non-issue between the two parts. It doesn't make the Intel processor better. So in this article, when it says things like, don't get me wrong, it's a huge plus for those after seamless processor upgrades, but that's not something everyone cares about. Okay, fair enough. And then it goes on to say, this is why Intel's Raptor Lake CPUs are great for mainstream gaming PCs, despite them being the last generation to support the existing LJ1700 socket. That second sentence doesn't come from the first sentence at all. That isn't, it clearly says this is why Intel's, like, what about there's processor upgrades not being something everyone cares about? Why does that make Intel Raptor Lake CPUs great for mainstream gaming PCs? It makes them,
it's a complete
I guess they're an option. I guess it makes them an option, but it's not a reason. It's the same. It's the exact same thing with the power efficiency factor. If you ignore the benefit of AMD CPUs, it's not like Intel you can now magnify one of their advantages. It just means that you're not considering one of their advantages. It doesn't make Intel better. So at best, this article has given 2 reasons that Intel is better than AMD for the average gamer, and 2 reasons why you should ignore AMD's advantages. And even then, one of the 2 reasons is pretty much not proven, and the second one is maybe with some conditions. So
essentially,
it's just very bizarre thinking.
Yeah, essentially, this article boils down to the 1300K and 1400K CPUs have stability issues that is probably going to result in performance being lower than what was advertised to you. So let's gloss over that. And then they're saying the Core i3 12100F, which everyone agrees on, is good value. That's the article. Like that's it. That's the article.
Yeah.
That's and I love. So I imagine you're done with the platform longevity BS.
Sure. I mean, I think we don't really need to labor that point. We talk about it a lot. It's obvious that point's wrong.
I love this part. This reeks of user benchmark to me. So at the very bottom, I guess this is the conclusion.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing more in the article except that paragraph.
There's nothing more in the article. So this is your final thoughts, I guess. And the final thoughts is titled, PC community sentiment is a particular thing. It's weird how popular sentiment driven by marketing deluge, enthusiast opinions, and YouTube videos tends to overshadow what really matters. Individual needs. That's what this whole article just did. Whether you'd be better off with an AMD or Intel CPU or even an AMD or NVIDIA GPU or any other product is something you should decide for yourself after consuming every aspect of the discussion. But you just did the opposite of that. You took every aspect of the discussion and was like, that good point, that good feature, no. That good feature and that no. Like that's what you just did. You just deleted aspects of the discussion that you didn't like because it didn't paint the narrative. Anyway, sure, AMD might turn out to be the better choice for many users. Okay, but by and large, the average gamer stands to gain a faster, better value and safer gaming rig by picking Intel over AMD in the current market. Well, there's some great counterpoints there. So hang on, AMD might turn out to be the better choice for many users. So is it are many users going to find AMD the better choice? But then again, this is what you're talking about. It says one thing, and then instantly contradicts that. So so hang on.
Yeah.
Who's the average gamer and who's many users?
And who's the
like what?
And the first paragraph of this sentence is just, it's user benchmark.
It is user benchmark. What does it even mean?
How popular sentiment. Yeah, it's weird how popular sentiment driven by marketing, enthusiast opinions, and YouTube videos tend to overshadow what really matters. That's just saying the community, maybe gets groupthink or something, and really I have the golden opinion that my opinion matters, and the opinion of YouTubers and Redditors and people in the community is wrong, right? Which is just
like there can definitely be
a really dismissive and minimizing way to speak, really.
It is, yeah, and you're generalizing significantly. Like we laugh sometimes and say like, Reddit, stuff over there. But there are a lot of people that know what they're talking about on Reddit. There's a lot of good opinions on Reddit and stuff like that. We usually just pick on the funny stuff. And it's like us saying that all articles that talk about how Intel CPUs are better than AMD CPUs are wrong and flawed just because of this one article, which I don't think we would say that. We'd have to read every individual article to see if they're like this one or they're well thought out and well researched. And yeah, just to say YouTube videos tend to overshadow what really matters. Like which YouTube videos are they talking about? Are they talking about Gamers Nexus? Are they talking about Jay's 2 cents or Hardware Canucks, Hardware Unboxed? Who are they talking about? And individual needs is what really matters. So what are individual needs? Is your individual need having a power efficient CPU that doesn't heat your room up in the summer? Is that your individual need? Maybe. Is your individual need having platform longevity where you can upgrade your CPU quickly and easily in the future? Maybe it is. And that's why our content, I don't say read, I mean it does if you read it at TechSpot, I guess, but why our content is delivered in a different way. We will say, in terms of price, performance, they're both very competitive. You're not going to be upset with whichever one you go with, whether it's a 14900K or a 7800X 3D or 7950X 3D. They're all very fast. They're going to do things very quickly. The 7950X 3D or the 1400K, whether you're video editing, 3D rendering, they're much of a muchness. Some things E-cores will be more efficient for, some things they won't be. We've demonstrated that, we've seen it, but neither blows either out of the water for the most part. They're generally much the same. So it then comes down to your individual needs. Like we talk about this, we say, do you care about power efficiency? If so, AMD is going to be better. Do you care about platform longevity? If so, AMD is going to be better. And you and I have sat here and we've had phone calls and I'm like, Tim, here's all the facts and figures. You've looked at it a lot yourself. Like, what are some of the positives that I'm glossing over or missing for LGA 1700 where I should be recommending it? And that's what we've actually spent, I would say, more time and energy on trying to work out.
Yeah, I really don't like, saying things like, basically saying, it's weird how all the community at large, like you can summarize all the points made there to the community, tends to overshadow this person's opinion, right? I feel like, marketing, yes, marketing is all about, a company trying to position their parts in the best position. So that could theoretically overshadow the things that matter, which could be the performance and other things and the needs, right? But YouTube videos, enthusiast opinions, people posting the popular sentiment, as this article talks about, that is driven by the quality of the product. It is extremely rare for a product that is marketed, or let's say all YouTubers are shills and are promoting the product extensively when it's not deserved. It's rare, if not impossible, for that to lead to good popular sentiment and strong enthusiast opinions. It just does not happen. Even when we post videos, there's often criticism of some of the points we make on Reddit. There's discussions about whether the conclusions that we've come to are fair or not based on what we've shown, and some people obviously disagree with that, and they point out that maybe our content was fair or reasonable all along, and that's fine. People have those sort of fair and reasonable discussions, but there is no way that a place like Reddit or forums would let these places get away with completely incorrect opinions about these products. Popular sentiment, if people were buying these products, so these are products that anyone can purchase, right? If YouTubers were always saying that AM5 or AMD CPUs were better, and marketing is saying this and blah, 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 that it's always better, and then people were buying it and finding out that they're actually not that good and they kind of suck, there would be no popular sentiment. It would not exist. We would be getting destroyed, like on Reddit, in comments. Our videos would be getting disliked. Like people in this community are not stupid. They see the data. They get the products in their hands. They test it. People, you just have to look in our Discord community about people doing all sorts of interesting benchmarking of their own, analysis, overclocking. They're looking at all different sources. If the popular sentiment by these apparently incorrect sources was wrong, man, like, I don't know, we would be getting the most insane emails, death threats. We would have no reputation whatsoever. So it's just, User Benchmark says this. This is the exact point that they make. It's just a completely stupid point. And it seems that this point has driven this entire article. It's almost like this author, or maybe there's been someone at the publication. I don't really know how this has worked. Maybe someone has said, you need to write this article, or maybe it's the opinion of the author. I'm not sure. I don't want to say one way or the other. But it seems like this point has driven this article. It's someone somewhere has said that, all these people are saying these things and it's wrong. So you need to kind of correct them with this weird, bizarre article. And then you go through and you come out with these points that just make no sense. And, you know, in an attempt to go against popular sentiment, it's really weird. It's really bizarre. It makes no sense. And honestly, I would be embarrassed to have my name on this article. It's terrible.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely is. There's probably, not too much more to say about it. Just quickly circling back to AMD's platform longevity, that's not something that we're saying you should buy an AMD 4 CPU anyway. It's I guess what you can say beyond a shadow of a doubt is, and we've sort of known this and been saying this for the last, what has it been, 2 years now or something like that, there will be another generation supported on this socket. Whether the generation's amazing, doesn't offer much of a performance uplift, or is a flop, we don't know. We just know for a fact there's going to be at least one more generation, and AMD really has indicated that there should be at least 2 more generations after Zen 4, and they indicated that in their materials to reviewers when they said stuff like, a key feature of investing in AM5 or buying an AM5 CPU is platform longevity, and you can't, in good conscience, advertise that and then have just 2 CPUs on the platform. And we've said that is something we will rake AMD over the coals for if that's what they do. But when you're comparing AM5 first generation CPUs, which is all we have at this point in time, with LJ 1700 CPUs, LJ 1700 is done and dusted. That's it. Whatever you buy now, future stuff will require a new motherboard. But we know with AM5, the motherboard you buy now will be the motherboard you likely use for the next CPU upgrade for either the next generation or the generation after that. But certainly the next generation. Zen 5 is going on your AM5 board. So if you bought a Ryzen 5 7600 and then the next generation of X3D CPUs are offering a significant performance upgrade, and you wait until they drop in price like the 5800 X3D did, then you're going to get yourself a phenomenally good deal, and it'll breathe new life into your system and stuff like that. So I'm not saying buy it for that sole reason. It's just that is an advantage of their platform. There's no other way of putting it. Future CPU upgrades, it's an advantage. How much of an advantage it'll turn out to be is anyone's guess.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I don't think it's bad to make articles or points or even YouTube videos that are outlining potential strengths of the Intel platform for gamers. I think it is a stretch to say Intel is clearly the better choice when building a gaming PC like this article does, but you could make an article that's similar to this and is more reasonable, talking about maybe it's, instead of 4 reasons Intel is better than AMD for the average gamer, it's 4 reasons you might consider Intel for your next gaming build. And as we've talked about, there are some reasons, maybe overshadowed generally speaking by the reasons you'd buy an AMD platform, but you could make an article that it does highlight things like at the low tier product segment, the Core i3s and lower end Core i5s are better value than AMD processors. Something that this article doesn't really mention at all, except briefly, are things like how, especially in the mid and lower tier product segments, that maybe Intel offers more productivity performance at the same price. So if you want that mix of gaming and productivity performance, and that's your primary focus and you're ignoring all the other things, then potentially, you could buy a 13600K over the 7600X, get similar gaming performance, get the benefit of multi-core productivity performance and those sorts of things. And you could make an article that's based around that, and maybe talking about how, yes, AMD does offer platform longevity. That's a good feature. But in some circumstances, maybe that's not going to be a factor for you based on X, Y, and Z. Like, you could make that article. Like, you could make it reasonable and discuss these things in a fair way. But if you're coming out of the gate saying things like, Intel is clearly the better choice for gaming, AMD has stability issues that Intel doesn't have, and not provide evidence for that, dismissing major features and then bizarrely saying that Intel CPUs are worth considering because you could just ignore AMD CPUs, which makes no sense. Like, I don't know. It's just a poor quality article. Like, you could, as I said, you could have made a better version of this piece that does discuss the things that Intel does currently do better than AMD in, but I guess they didn't do that.
Yeah, and the reason we're talking about this content is the reason you mentioned at the start of the video, is that we don't talk about every random silly article or blog that's posted on the internet, because frankly, we'd be running the podcast 24/7 just doing that. It's that xdadevelopers.com is a massive tech website. Like, it's huge. So this is published on, I suppose, in that sense, a reputable website. Like, it's a big website. So a lot of people are going to see this article that was posted a day ago now. And already a significant number of people have commented on it. So, I mean, people aren't buying it. So I guess that's a positive. But yeah, it sort of reads like a damage control article.
Yeah, like I said, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, I guess it is a successful article in the sense of clickbait, and we're talking about it on a podcast, so I imagine a lot of people have sort of taken the rage bait with this sort of thing. But as we were talking about in our previous podcast, when we're talking about what should YouTube creators be doing, and just generally things around reputation and ad deals and stuff, I think that you don't want to be doing too many rage bait sort of articles, clickbait sort of things, because it does impact your ability to be taken seriously in these sorts of industries. If you want to be producing content that's on the PC space, on CPUs and GPUs, Intel, AMD, and that sort of thing, and you're trying to grow that side of your reporting business, then you don't want to be publishing articles that are embarrassing and make no sense and are getting destroyed in comments. Like, that's just not the way to go about doing that. So yes, this article may have generated some nice clicks and ad revenue for XDA developers, but generally this is not the way that I personally would approach trying to create content. Like, I think if we started making rage bait content for YouTube, which could very really have, we could make a video that's titled Intel is clearly the better choice than AMD for gaming PCs, or something with a rage-inducing thumbnail. But that is going to hurt our channel long term. And any smaller creator that was thinking of that strategy to try and make their YouTube channel more successful in the future, that's also going to hurt you generally. So yeah, I don't know what the thinking is behind there, but I imagine it's something along those lines. So yeah. All right, let's take a break and we'll talk about our boring lives. All right, Steve, we're back. Boring life update. I'll go first this time, because I can't remember if I went first last time. Doesn't really matter. But I did on the weekend the first mowing of the season.
Ooh,
so everyone likes
news.
mower chat.
Yep.
But this week I got out the mower. The first time I'd used it in a while, so it took a little bit of effort to get it started, because as you leave engines for a little while, and you might need to run the pump a few more times than usual. But got it working. Went out mowing, and surprisingly, grass hadn't grown too much, apart from some certain areas, which obviously got a bit more rain coverage than others. But yeah, very enjoyable to get back out there on the mower, and the satisfaction of a nice mowing job is definitely still there. So
excellent.
Yes, that was what I've gotten up to. Have you mowed your lawn?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I've mowed mine twice now. So
nice.
I've had the personal enjoyment of zooming around my backyard on my ride-on mower twice.
Nice.
And yeah, all good. But I mean, I use mine a lot over summer anyway for moving trailers and things. So
Yeah.
it's rare that I would go a week without firing mine up. So it sees a lot of action all over the winter and everything. But yeah, anyway, it was good. I enjoyed it. And yeah, it's only a little bit annoying at this time of year because it's hard to mow the lawn when it's not wet. That's the challenge of these sort of colder days.
Yeah, just trying to get into the right sort of conditions. And yeah, so as we get into winter, I'm sure my grass will be growing more. But yeah, that was nice. And also this week, well, I watched your AFL team play last night and can't say I was overly impressed despite them winning. So just our little AFL chat section.
I thought of a thing I can talk about, Tim.
Go for it.
Do you want me to jump in now, or I'm more than happy to wait for you to finish?
Go ahead. I didn't really have much more to say about your team because they were very disappointing, and the Crows haven't played yet, so not much has happened.
You've given me an opportunity not to forget what I was going to say. And what was I going to say again? Oh, that's right. So carrying on from a previous podcast discussion, I don't know if it was the last podcast or the one before, but it doesn't matter. So I ditched my Foxtel. So for those who didn't hear that conversation, Foxtel is an Australian streaming service like a Netflix or whatever. But, well, Foxtel does everything, doesn't it? TV shows, movies.
Yeah, it's a cable service. It comes with a box that you need, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So I had that. I used it only for the football. It was $54. They jacked it up to $77. And I was like, I don't really need this anymore. I don't want to pay that much money, which is, I think it's like $1,000 a year or something, right? For watching a couple of games of football. And I was already paying like $420 for KO for the year. So I'm like, I'll get rid of the $1,000 a year I'm wasting on that and go with KO because KO is now 4K, which is what we were talking about in the last podcast. They're so dodgy. They are the slimiest, scummiest company, the whole Hubble Foxtel thing. Oh, so you know how they're advertising KO as 4K now. I guess you've got to read the fine print with any of these dodgy, scummy companies. But it's only 4K for some games. So you pay $25, but then if you want KO 4K, you pay $35. So it's a $10 premium. And it's called, it's the 4K KO option. But I think on the weekend, I don't know how many games are being played. I think only 3 of them are going to be shown to KO customers in 4K. So my game last night was in 1080p, which, as I've said on my large 4K TV, looks very, very bad. And Balin wasn't impressed either because he's bought a new TV and he watched the game because I played my team played Balin's team last night. And yeah, so I don't know. I just find that dodgy that that they do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it from memory is any of the games where you get the Channel 7 broadcast team as opposed to the Fox Footy broadcast team, it will always be 1080p because they use the footage from Channel 7. So again, for non-Australians, with the football here, there's 2 main broadcasters. You can get either the Channel 7, which is like our free-to-air over the antenna type coverage, and then Foxtel has their own channel, which is then played on KO as well, Fox Footy. And Fox Footy, generally I find their broadcast better and they do provide coverage in 4K. I believe that is potentially going to change with the next AFL broadcast deal, which I think starts from next year, where both Foxtel and Channel 7 will be producing separate coverages. So even for Channel 7 matches, there will be a separate Foxtel coverage as opposed to now Fox Footy just reuses the Channel 7 footage. But that's why some games are not in 4K.
Yeah. So
I think that even for some other games, depending on like the ground or the venue, they don't have 4K capabilities at some grounds. But yes, like...
I'm not sure about that because Foxtel 4K was 4K for every single ground when I watched it last season and the season before. Like there was never a 1080p game.
Over Foxtel, the Channel 7 matches definitely would have been 1080p upscaled to 4K because Channel 7 does not capture in 4K at all, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, Channel 7's irrelevant to me because KO and Foxtel are the same thing. They're the same company. They're just a different service. So essentially, if I had paid $77 for Foxtel 4K, I would have got 4K. But if I pay $35 for KO 4K, I get 1080p.
Yes, except for Channel 7 games, because even over the Foxtel box, the Channel 7 games are not 4K, but even though they might say they are.
Well, every game last season looked 4K. So I'm not sure how that's working. And
It might use a higher bit rate or something for their
yeah,
1080p
well,
stream, which would make it look better.
it
But
definitely, well, on my TV, the difference between 1080p and 4K is night and day. Like you don't mistake 1080p for 4K, and every single broadcast on Foxtel looked good. So I'm not sure what's going on there.
They definitely use a higher bit rate. Especially because, like, I remember the cricket matches and stuff, even the standard KO streams would look worse than just your basic Foxtel streams before they used to upgrade it all to 4K. But anyway, it's a mess because they, if they say it's 4K, but it's only some matches, it's like, come on, guys.
Yeah, it's very dodgy. Well, Balaam was livid, let's say, as a good way of putting it, because he upgraded for the extra $10. And the extra $10, as he said, it's like not trivial for him. Like, it's not like, he upgraded for that because the 4K looks worlds better on his new OLED TV that he saved up for a year to get. And now he's stuck watching 1080p half the time. So pretty garbage, pretty embarrassing regardless, right? Like, I mean, it's 2024 and the AFL's broadcasting games regardless of who they're doing it through in 1080p. Like, what? How is that a thing?
They've had a lot of very embarrassing moments. It was only the grand final, the final match of the season to decide who wins, only recently was broadcast in HD.
Yeah,
like,
that's awful.
Not that long ago, because of issues around, the main channel or something on free-to-air was an SD channel and the HD channel was like a secondary channel, but they contractually had to broadcast it exclusively on the main channel or something. You only ever got this like awful SD coverage of the most important game of the year, which is just like totally embarrassing.
And to be
totally
fair,
embarrassing.
well, it still is though, because it's 1080p. You cannot watch the Australian Football League you cannot watch the Aussie Super Bowl.
Yep.
I guess is a fair way of putting it. Yes. In 4K.
Yep, it's impossible.
It's not
You
possible.
Can't even watch it over KO because they don't have the rights to it.
So the biggest, I don't know, it's Australia's biggest sporting event of the year, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So
it'd be the most watched event.
Yeah, Australia's biggest sporting event of the year cannot be watched in 4K and is limited to, at best, 1080p. That is extremely embarrassing. Like, what the hell is that all about? So
there's been so many other issues. Like, back nowadays, the Channel 7, like if you're watching on Fox Footy, and the main reason you'd watch on Fox Footy versus the free-to-air coverage is that Fox Footy, and the reason why you pay for it, is that it has no ads from siren to siren. So between quarters, like when the gameplay is going on, you don't see any ads. Whereas if you watch the free-to-air broadcast, after every goal, when they pause and they reset the game, you would see an ad, which is very annoying. There can be many goals in an AFL match. Originally, when that deal was brought in, when Fox Footy would simultaneously broadcast the Channel 7 game, so they would basically copy the feed from Channel 7 with the commentators and everything, you'd get this no ad situation in between goals, but the commentators wouldn't say anything. So they would cut off their commentary. There'd be no replays or anything. And then there'd be like this minute-long nothing. And then maybe 30 seconds before the game would restart again, then they would start talking and show a replay or something. So you'd get this like awful, stupid coverage that clearly no one had thought about this. Nowadays, you do get the commentators continuing to speak and showing replays while ads are being shown on Channel 7, specifically for the paying Foxtel customers. But it's just one of those like, don't people ever think of this? It wasn't even that long ago that there was no one that was showing the football streamed to a PC. This might have been, I don't know, maybe it's a decade now ago, but certainly well into streaming on PCs being a thing with YouTube videos, Netflix, whatever. No one owned, I think someone owned the rights, maybe it was Telstra, but they weren't utilizing it. So there was no way on a desktop PC to watch AFL legally. Like, you just couldn't do it, which is, again, mind-blowingly stupid. Like, it's just unbelievable that would be a situation. And even if you got like the mobile version, you'd try and run on a desktop and you'd be like, oh, sorry, licensing, we can't do it.
Yeah.
Like, come on. Seriously, get your act together. So it's just embarrassing, those things.
They're desperately trying to grow the sport. and
Yep.
it's like, you guys have no idea what you're doing. You have no idea how to do it. Like in the modern day, like you look at even companies like, Formula One now, what they're doing online and their TV series and how they broadcast and stuff, it's so much better. So yeah, the AFL really needs to up their game.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, I just had to get that off my chest. It was very, very disappointing watching the game last night in 1080p. I know it's a first world problem, but it looked crap. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. Yeah, I've certainly, over the years being a football fan, there's been a lot of ranting that can be done about the broadcast coverage and all the various restrictions and issues. I remember even a long time ago, there used to be a version of the feed that you could get that was no commentary. So you could like press a button and it would just be like the stadium noise. So if you got like annoying commentators, you just press a button and you just get the stadium noise, and that's all good. Why they would remove that feature over time makes no sense to me either. Like, as you say, like there's a lot of other
more
sports.
Features.
Yeah, they should be adding more coverage, more features. Like, I would pay a decent amount of money to get a button that I could press to see a wider camera angle, whether that's a down the ground camera or just a fixed position camera that isn't as zoomed in. Because a lot of the times on the coverage, they zoom in too close, so you can't see, who's up the field for the players to kick to or what the structures are. It's zoomed in on the action.
Yeah, that's the problem. I really enjoy watching from my couch, but that is always like the ball's kicked and it's kind of like a surprise. Who's there?
Yeah, I know.
Get there and there could be no one there, or there could be just the opposition. So yeah, that would be really good having. Imagine the ability to have that on a separate TV or something as well. That would be insane. But again, the Formula One does all that sort of stuff. I mean, you can select cars that you want to watch the entire race from. You don't have to watch their specific broadcast. You can pick all that sort of stuff. So they've got a very long way to go. But I mean, look, that stuff would be nice. All I'm asking for is, could I please watch the football in 4K on the 4K TV? And I've had a 4K. How long have you had a 4K TV for now? Like, it's not like it came in yesterday.
It's been around for a decade plus, at least. I've had 4K TVs.
I've been watching TV on a 4K TV for pretty much as long as I can remember now. So could we please just move it forward and have 4K as, everything offers 4K. I mean, we can do it on our YouTube channel.
And we have.
Maybe we should.
For how long?
Yeah, we should take one of the GH6s and tap it into their broadcast, and I'll film it for them. I'll give you a wide. I'll just sit up and give you that wide angle, Tim.
I'll continue this rant because there's a few other points about this rant that I think are worth talking about. So the first one, right? This really annoyed me. Is the Adelaide Crows and most teams, there'll be preseason practice matches. So this is before the official coverage begins there's even official preseason matches. I'm talking about the very first practice match. A team might set up an unofficial scratch match with, Adelaide would usually play Port Adelaide because they're both in the same team. That would be the very first practice you'd see. And more recently, these games have been streamed, but they're not on the TV broadcast or on K or anything. They're just on the Adelaide Crows website. You can click a button and you can get this stream. And recently, these streams have been the worst production I have ever seen of live streaming. The app they use is a complete joke. It has terrible, terrible quality. It almost never works. There's often a frame rate mismatch. So a broadcast that should be 60 FPS is being played back at what looks like 40 FPS. So it's really juddery and like the motion is awful. It's like, guys, the YouTube platform for streaming is amazing. Yeah. If you have no contractual obligations to produce it for KO or whatever, official AFL stream it is, YouTube will give you the best tools for streaming. I'm sure Twitch is quite good as well, but one of those major platforms that has existed specifically designed for this will serve it to you in every resolution instantly, perfect quality, no mismatches or issues, great app. You can watch it on anything with no problems. Why aren't you using YouTube for that? It must be some contractual BS where they have to use the awful website provided garbage instead of the best platform for streaming. It blows my mind. Makes no sense, right? Rant number one.
Yep, gotcha.
I'm sure it's the case for other AFL teams where if you want to watch a preseason match, you get dealt with that crap.
Yeah, that's frustrating. At least that's free, though. You're not paying a subscription for that. But continue.
The second one, right? If anyone is still listening to this and is not from Australia, doesn't really care too much about AFL, and you sat through our rant about AFL and AFL-related issues, right?
Apologies.
Most sports these days have some sort of technology that assists with deciding decisions around scores and other things, right?
No.
So even another sport that I watch, cricket, has a great decision review system. I know some people would disagree that the LBW decisions, leg before wickets, method of dismissal in that game, some people would argue that the prediction technology is not amazing. But let me tell you, compared to what the AFL offers, the DRS is incredible. Like tennis, right? You can have real-time ball positioning anywhere on the court. It'll tell you with millimeter precision whether the ball is in or out of the court. In the soccer, in the EPL, people complain about the video-assisted referee, which tells you whether players are offside or not. And it uses all sorts of technology to decide, is the ball in the goals or not? And they use various different cameras and stuff, right? AFL. They will use the worst quality goal line camera you have ever seen to decide whether balls have crossed the line or not. We're talking
it's like 1080p, 30 FPS.
1080p, mate, it's 480p. It's like a GoPro from 25 years ago. It's disgustingly bad.
It's the frame rate, though, that's bad, in my opinion.
Oh, it's so bad. It's embarrassing.
Like the ball moves. It's like the ball moves at 10,000 miles per hour. Like between frames, it's gone half a meter. It's like a human being kicked this ball. We have the technology to capture it moving less than a millimeter. And it's like we're trying to work out how to hit the goalpost. The goalpost is here. I'm just holding my hand in the air for those listening to the podcast as a podcast. And in one shot, the ball's here. And then the next shot, the ball's there. And they're trying to work out, did it hit the post? So they're trying to work out, has the trajectory of the ball changed? And it's so bad. Oh,
it's crazy how bad it is. And for AFL, the ball hitting the post is very important because you get a lesser score if the ball hits the post while it's going through the goals. Also, you get a lesser score if the ball is touched before it crosses the goal line. So, for example, if a player kicks it and another player briefly touches it with their hand before it sails through, then instead of getting 6 points for that, you get 1 point and it's called a behind. So if you've got that system where hitting the post is important and players potentially hitting the ball before it goes through the goal is important, you would want to have in the general vicinity of the goal high resolution, high frame rate cameras at every single ground so that you could assess those factors. Only recently have they brought in effectively like a SNICO technology, which can detect whether the ball has hit the post or not by the vibration in the post, which is amazing compared to the other things that they've got. But there used to be a situation where some grounds that you would play at would not even have goal line cameras. So cameras in the goalpost pointing directly at the goals. So if you're a team that happens to be playing at one of those grounds, well, you're out of luck. If you're playing at a major stadium, you're lucky to get the goal line technology. At other grounds, they don't bother putting it in, which I would say is some sort of integrity issue with the competition where some grounds could have the technology and others not. But anyway, the fact that not only can they not broadcast the game in 4K in this day and age, the year of 2024, they somehow haven't found out that what is widely available are high frame rate, high resolution cameras that they can point in the vicinity of the goals.
They're not even expensive.
No, they're not. They're not. It blows my mind that in other sports you could have millimeter precision whether the ball is in or out or over a line or not over a line. Cameras installed in stadiums doing positional tracking, and AFL's like, I'm going to tape GoPro to post.
GoPro 1. Maybe it's
GoPro 1.
It might be an original Android or iPhone phone.
And we're talking this is $1 billion sport. The broadcast right deals are hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars.
Yeah, they're probably
not talking about a small sport, but
they probably don't make enough money off sports bet. So,
we won't even get into that. That's a whole other can of worms. My God. Anyway,
they've got to do more promoting gambling to children. It's just that's what they've got to do to make money.
Yeah.
Tim's like,
Yeah.
end it.
I 100% agree with you on that point, but man, that's a whole other topic.
Yep, no, fair enough.
Anyway, the AFL should
Back to
broadcast
mowing.
all games in 4K. They should have high quality cameras on the goal line. They should broadcast the grand final in a reasonable resolution and make it available through KO.
And one final request: when they mow the MCG, that should be live streamed with multiple camera angles.
Satisfying. Nice.
There, I think we've got everything off our chest now that we want to see happen, and none of it's going to happen. I mean, these demands will be met in probably 2034, I reckon we'll have it by. I reckon. I'd
say so.
Yeah.
Yeah, eventually.
So just got to relax, sit back and put up with the 1080p in the meantime. Yeah, sorry, you said you didn't have anything else to...
No, that's it. I enjoy a good rant. So, yeah, that probably closes out the podcast, I would say. It's nice to get some frustrations off my chest. Maybe it's because Adelaide has won one of their last 6 games that I feel like ranting about the badness of the AFL. It's cathartic, maybe.
I mean, look, having to watch that many bad games at 1080p...
Oh,
at least...
It's painful.
Yeah, it'd be less painful watching them get, wrecked most of the time in 4K. So think of Tim, AFL.
Yeah, get on it. Anyway, that's it for this podcast episode. Thanks for everyone for watching to the end, especially the people who don't even really know what AFL is, but just sat through our weird rant about AFL-related issues and technology relating to an Australian-specific sport. I appreciate those people who sat through that and didn't just immediately click away. So big thumbs up to you guys. We've got our YouTube channel and audio feed. So if you want to switch up the way you're listening to the podcast, they're available through 2 different places. The video feed is obviously just a video of us. Nothing too crazy going on there, but it's on YouTube. And the audio feed's available on all usual podcast places. So yeah, thanks for listening. That does it for this episode. And we'll be back next week with more news and maybe ranting about the AFL, breaking down articles. Who knows? We'll be back.